Hey, how's it going? So, the new collaboration and everything else was just announced, and a lot of people are considering whether they should be pulling for these units. Maybe they should pull for Basar right now, or Holiday Yufine because they waited, but I just thought I'd go through everything real quick to kind of show whether you should get the units or not, reasons why they might be good or bad, etc., right? Because there's a lot of things packed all in here, and also, the new ML5 character, ML Charles, came out, who I like to call Carlos. So, a lot of people are debating whether they should be using their hard-earned bookmarks or not, and I thought I'd try and help you out a little bit on whether you should be going for them. So, first of all, we got Emilia. And so her base stats are Gemini Soul Weaver, which is the same as DN, which is really solid baseline stats, even though she's very slow. She has really high base health and defense, and she has some effect resist with pretty nice concentration and release. So, a lot of people might see 103 base speed and think, oh, well, that's not very good, but what you have to consider is DN actually is normally built very fast. Normally people have like 230, 240 DNs actually. And because the fact that she has high, well, okay, the health isn't the highest, but the fact that she has decent health and defense makes it so that you can sacrifice a little of that to make her a little bit faster. So her first skill, her S3, dispels 2 debuffs from all allies, which is, nice. It's a shame that it's not all debuffs, but 2 is a decent amount. Most of the time, that's going to be all you need. And recovers health of allies and grants a barrier for 2 turns. So, overall, it's nothing super crazy. The barrier and heal are based on her health, not the allies. So, that's pretty good for most characters. It's a really basic skill overall. Nothing too crazy. 4-turn cooldown. It's a lot like Destina's S3, to be perfectly honest, so really, you're not looking at a lot here. But honestly, I think that skill overall pales in comparison to this one. So this ability I actually find to be very strong. Upon first glance, it doesn't seem too crazy, but it dispels 2 debuffs, increases attack of the ally for a turn. This is on one ally. Increases combat readiness by up to 50% and her own CR by 25. Its soul burn also heals the ally because, it normally doesn't heal, so that's an added bonus for 10 souls. So, a lot of people are going to look at this and say, yeah, it seems okay. And that's what I first thought, but when you look at the cooldown, it actually goes down to 2 turns, and if you're in an extended battle, a 50% CR push with attack buff and a CR push for herself if you have, let's say, Magra's Tome, or you could have Rod of Amaryllis for the heal. With a 10 soul burn to heal, I think in an extended fight, this could actually be pretty damn powerful. It might not seem like a lot at first, but as the fight goes on, she's just giving more and more turns to the DPS. A lot of people like to draft 2 DPS and then 3 characters to support that DPS, and if they ban one of your DPS in RTA and you have 1 left, she's just going to be spamming this the entire fight on that 1 DPS, whether they're Landy or Spectre Tenebra or whoever. That's actually very beneficial. It means you don't have to have another character that gives attack buff. She can just solo attack buff your ally over and over, and it's going to last forever. The two-turn cooldown and the fact that it lasts 2 turns. And I actually think this is a pretty damn good ability. We don't know for sure exactly how good she's going to be, but I think this skill has a lot of potential. Now, her S1 is nothing, really. Oh, here we go. This ability, it's Destina rules S1. It doesn't do anything, so there's not really much to pay attention to here. I doubt this is actually going to heal a lot. I mean, it'd be interesting and surprising if it's actually healed a ton, but I highly doubt that. Then we look at her artifact. So, I think this artifact is actually pretty decent. Upon first glance, maybe if I think about it more, I would not think that it was decent, but I think it has some applications that are very good. It's the only way to reliably heal an ally, I guess, when it's not your turn. Is definitely helpful. Gives some effect resist, which is useful for her. It's kind of like a Water's Origin for an ally, without the push, obviously, but it gives the heal, which is pretty nice. I think it could be useful with, let's say, T-Surin. T-Surin now can't be killed by something like a top model Luca's S1 burn. So it can be useful for something like that, or just if you need that little bit of extra tankiness overall just to make your character survive. It would be really useful versus a lot of high damage comps just to make it so your tanky bruisers get that little bit of edge to survive. You know, maybe it's not the best, but we'll have to wait and see if the applications for it actually are viable. Next, we move on to Rem. So, look at it. Okay, so her base stats, she's a warrior Scorpio, and her base stats are very good for the type of character she is. So, she has crit chance imprint, which is amazing. That means it's one of the type of characters you want to triple S, because crit chance imprint is just so valuable for rounding out stats. So right now she just immediately starts out at about 32% crit chance, which makes it way easier to gear her. Her speed is abysmal, but she more than makes up for that with the fact that her attack, health, and defense are really, really good. So already, she's a pretty solid baseline of a character, so you know she's going to be some sort of bruiser, right? And when you look at her skill set, her S3 increases the attack caster for 3 turns, so she's self-sufficient, doesn't need any sort of attack buff to get the maximum amount of damage out. And she decreases hit chance of the enemies for 2 turns with 100% chance and gives her 50% CR. So, doesn't seem all that crazy, to be perfectly honest. Seems like an okay ability. The fact that she gets attack buff for 3 turns is great, and she does a good amount of damage, and hit chance is nice, so just an overall nice ability, you know, nothing too crazy. Kind of like Emilia's S3. It doesn't really stand out as anything to him. But her S2 is where things get really interesting. So she dispels all debuffs, which is great once anybody dies, ally or enemy. And she gets demon mode for 2 turns, and it can only be active once every 5 turns, so you kind of want to go crazy during this mode, right? And she also has a separate passive that whenever an ally is attacked, she has a, at max, 20% chance to counterattack with Iron Strike, which is below here, I'll talk about in a second. And it takes priority over counterattacks. So that means, let's say somebody AoEs you, that she will use Iron Strike over the counter set that she has, let's say. So, demon mode is she's immune to all debuffs, so she dispels them and she becomes immune to debuffs, and she ignores effect resist when attacking. So that means her S3, for instance, will always land the blind on anybody, assuming they don't have immunity. And also demon mode can't be dispelled, so it's a special buff that's only for her. As a separate thing, this is something that I really like. Iron Strike attacks all enemies, decreasing buff duration by 1 turn and making them unhealable for a turn. So this unhealable is affected by demon mode, so it's going to land 100% of the time. It cannot be resisted. And decreased buff duration also will, which means she can just dispel buffs over and over as long as Iron Strike is being applied, right? Even without demon mode, this is going to be going, and with demon mode, you can't even resist it. This is actually very powerful, I think. And the fact that it's just an Elbrus that's added onto her, it means also people may be running her counter set. That's a viable option. Speed set's always viable, that's possible, but I'm sort of thinking lifesteal set might be good. So if you look in the actual video that they have here, so let's see, she has 3s. All right. He's gonna attack now. Oh, so that was her applying it actually. And now. So that's the counterattack right there. That did a decent amount of damage, and I think if she's on lifesteal, she's basically just going to be continuously topping herself up. Any sort of AoE attack with lifesteal, let's say lifesteal Charlotte for instance, makes the character really annoying to deal with, where they're constantly healing back up. She can't be debuffed when she's in demon mode as well, so makes it so you can't really stop her from healing from that. You can't disable her. Although counter set might be really strong on her because it makes it so that if somebody focuses her down because they're worried about getting countered by the Elbrus procs, that, you know, she'll still be able to fight for herself, right? And her S1, actually pretty good. It's actually very strong, so I think counter set might be, it might have the highest viability for her. Where she attacks an enemy with a up to 50% chance to defense break, right? If you're in demon mode, they can't resist it. And when she's granted demon mode, she gets an extra attack with the same exact skill. And if you soul burn, it's a 100% chance. So that means if she's in demon mode, she has an unresistible 100% chance to defense break and then go into a second attack. It's like Alencia's, except it can't be resisted. So that's kind of a big deal. She gives herself attack buff and has an ability that can guarantee defense break into a second hit. They didn't show it there because RB died, but that's a really powerful combination. And the fact that she's probably going to be built like a kind of bulky bruiser, I think means that in an extended fight, she's going to be a very scary character. She's going to be countering nonstop. She has defense break. She's self-sufficient with attack buff. The blind is really nice because, you know, you're attacking her team and she's getting counterattacks and you're not able to do much when you're blinded every time you miss. So I think overall she seems like a very, very strong and viable bruiser. We don't have the numbers exactly for all her skills yet, so we're not 100% sure, but just first impressions, she seems like a very, very good unit. There's not many good blue bruisers in the game. As we'll see later, Shu got an EE, which means she might actually be a decent bruiser right now, but as it stands, there's not too many blue bruisers that are actually all that used or in the meta, so having another one is actually kind of a big deal, especially with Carrot being such a character in the current meta. For Artifact, this is an interesting one. So it seems like it has weird applications for the most part, but I think it could be possibly used on some characters as a tech, especially versus Cleave. I think can be good because it's whenever anybody dies, you get the push. So if you have some sort of warrior using an anti-Cleave, maybe General Purgus, let's say, or somebody like that, I think you can put this on them, and the extra CR push when anybody dies, you know, can make it so that you can actually cut in between a Cleave team and possibly either cleave them or do something along those lines. And I think that's really strong. And as we see with the character later on, that's also a warrior that will be shown off. This might be very viable on them as well. So if we skip forward, then we have Ram. So Ram is a mage Gemini, so this is the same as Spectre, Tenebria, Silverblade, Armenta, etc. Except you'll notice she has really high base attack, which is a little bit strange at first, right? Her imprint is effectiveness, which, you know, you see the effectiveness here, you see that, you're like, okay, so this character must not be just full damage. Unfortunately to say, this character, not a PvP unit. She's the free unit given, and most free units aren't all that amazing unless they get buffed later on. Her passive is she cannot be pushed back, and she gets a baseline attack increase of 30%. That's why her attack was so high. So she just straight up can't be pushed back. And you might be thinking, oh, well maybe she's going to be Basar counter or something like that, which is what I first thought when they showed that. And we'll see in a second what she's really for, but her S3 is decreased defensive target and gets increased attack greater for 2 turns. So it's a very underwhelming S3 overall, because it's just, okay, you do some damage and defense break and then you set up for turns after? Well, our S1 must be crazy, right? Well, you see, here's the unfortunate part, is that she is an expo unit, as you can see right here. This is not a unit that's really that insane for anything but expeditions, namely water expedition. So she can't be pushed back so that this boss can't push her back, which is, you know, I guess that's nice, right? And she gives herself greater attack and defense break for it, so she's going to be the highest attack unit on your team, and she can't be pushed back, so it means that this boss isn't going to be able to put her back to 0% CR. That's really all this is. You know, if you look at her S1 here, how boring. Well, they're not wrong. So, has a chance to decrease attack, and when she's buffed, effect chance increases, so you decrease the attack of that boss and defense break, and she's the target of its pushback, so all around useful stuff. The soul burn makes it attack everybody, which is nice. I guess that's for some sort of other content, but not very useful in Blue Expo. And that's kind of it. On first glance, I don't really have any hopes for her being used in anything else. Doesn't seem to have anything applicable anywhere else, unless her S3 does such a ridiculous amount of damage that can one-shot anybody. Not going to be like an anti-Basar tech. At the moment, I think she's a little bit boring, as this name suggests, right? Bit of a shame, right? Her artifact, so this is a free artifact that we're going to get, so she's a free character you get from login and the side story. This is also from that. Mage exclusive, but the effect doesn't really seem like a mage type thing. Against an elite or boss monster, it takes 20% less damage, and it doesn't stack with other damages, and 15% attack. I don't really understand the point of this artifact, except I guess to use her for Blue Expo? because you don't really want mages to be taking tons of elite or boss monster damage, so I don't really see this ever being used, and upon first glance it seems completely worthless to me, but maybe someone will find something very cool to do with it, but I highly doubt it. So, that's the Iseria units, and you might be thinking, well, okay, I guess that's it, but this was something that, at first, I thought wasn't going to be a big deal. So, 5 new 3-star characters. At first glance, it's going to seem like, okay, who cares? 3-star heroes are garbage. Like, the last few batches of 3-star heroes haven't really seen all that impressive. So I was immediately just kind of like, okay, whatever, who cares? But they actually have some interesting things. This first unit, Milani, you can mostly ignore their base stats, but overall, kind of just tanky warrior character. Really nothing to write home about. Has some effectiveness as her imprint. So, S1 can stun for a turn, that's nothing crazy. S2, she has a chance to take less damage, and she increases her CR at the end of the turn after she gets hit by that. Okay, whatever. S3 adds a new thing into the game, though. Stigma here is a new debuff we've never seen before, so I think this character is purely being used as a test for this debuff that they possibly might add on into an ML5 or some sort of character in the future, but decreases amount recovered, from heals, and combat readiness increases by 50%. So that's Politis' passive and a decreased healing added in. So the debuff by itself really isn't all that crazy, and it's on her S3, which, decreases speed and applies stigma. Really not that crazy at all, nothing to write home about, but just the fact that they add this in on a 3-star unit means probably is going to come on another unit as well in the future, so that's just something worthy of note, but she's not too crazy. This next character, however, now this character, not only is it the design, the huge booba, and, she's got a pretty good design, let's be real. First of all, first thing you see, 8 speed imprint. That's a big deal. Haven't seen that in a really long time. 8 speed imprint is the same as MRSA, for instance, so cleavers or people trying to speed contest cleavers are immediately going to look at this and say, okay, well, this character has potential immediately. Maybe she has a use. And she has 110 base speed, which is pretty decent. Her base attack really isn't that great. She's a light warrior. Doesn't seem that crazy. Also has effectiveness, right? But this character, I think, has a lot of potential out of almost any 3-star in the game. So, first of all, she has this, which, if she has an attack buff on, she gets an automatic dual attack, and it has a 50% chance to defense break. That's a pretty big deal. That is Ross's S2 on an S1. Now, she has to have attack buff, right? If you soul burn this, it's a 100% chance to defense break, though, by the way. So, immediately, for a cleaver, they're thinking, okay, well, I can attack buff the team a lot of the time. And she has a guaranteed dual attack with a defense break. That could just kill a unit right there. So that's actually a pretty huge deal, I think. For a character with a speed imprint that also is able to bring an ally to attack, usually that can one-shot a unit in a lot of speed contest battles where 2 fast people are going against each other. Sometimes picking a character like MRSA isn't really going to be enough damage for you, but something like this could be a little bit better. And also, S2 gives skill nullifier and attack buff to herself, and then attack buff to an ally other than the caster for 2 turns. She has self-sufficient attack buff for herself, so that her S1 gets the dual attack, and she gets 50% CR, and she buffs an ally. So, 50% CR seems like, well, that's not enough. But if you're using her in cleave, and you, let's say you Rem's artifact on her, because she's a warrior, then she could get a 74% push in total, and, not including something like Sashi Thons either, or any sort of other push. That means you could possibly S2 with her very early, attack buff an ally, and get her to 50% CR. Then once you kill a unit, she gets that extra push from Rem's artifact and Sashi Thons, and she's basically going to take another turn right there. So that means she's self-sufficient and buffing an ally and a speed imprint, and can take another turn to defense break, possibly one-shot a unit. I think that is a ton of potential as somebody who cleaves a lot. And, even you're using her to anti-cleave as just a speed imprint, that could be really big versus cleave. And the fact that she gets skill nullifier makes her a little bulky. For S3 also, gives 30% damage reduction while this skill is up. and it does more damage based on her missing health, so an execute kind of ability like Blue Crow or Sage Bale, which I think is decent. It's probably not going to do that much damage, let's be honest, but I think her S1 and S2 more than make up for the fact that whether her S3 is useful. Speed imprints are hard to come by. Adding a new one, you know, is a pretty big deal. The worrying thing about adding new speed imprints is if they're too good, then that could cause an issue, right? Like, what if you always want to pick that speed imprint in cleave? What if they're so insane that you always do that? Then it makes it so you can't ever outspeed somebody who's cleaving, because they'll always immediately pick a speed imprint, no matter what they're against. I don't think that's going to happen exactly. Just more that there's a possibility of things like that when they add speed imprints, so I think Smilegate's trying to be very careful. So, after her, we get Christy. So this character, for a 3-star, this is an absurdly high amount of health and defense. She's slow as hell. She has effect resist and concentration. And that'll make more sense once you see her skill set. So her S1 is Provoke. Okay, that's decent. A lot of characters like this have that. Now this is interesting. Has a 15% chance to counterattack when attacked when you max this. And at the start of the battle, gives half of her effect resist to the unit in the back. And this effect resist can't be dispelled or changed. It is only removed when the unit in the back dies. Even if she dies, it will still remain. So this is a very unique and interesting thing. This means you could use this for, let's say, ML Ken to make him more useful. I know it's kind of a joke, but at the same time, it's true. Or, for instance, you could use this on whatever backline character, like, for instance, Landy, let's say. So if you're against units like Carrot, and you give this effect resist to your DPS in the back, Carrots don't generally run much effectiveness. You use her, and you're fighting against, let's say, Fairy Tail, Tenebria, and Carrot, etc. And if they can't debuff you, they're going to lose the game, because they have 2 units that just are dead units at that point. And if you use this on somebody like, let's say you're not confident about resisting a Soul Weaver like Fairy Tail Tenebria, it can help negate that. Or if you use this, yeah, on Landy versus Carrot, yeah, Landy's, you know, green versus fire, but if Landy never gets debuffed by Burn, it doesn't really matter, right? She's just going to run wild and do whatever she wants. So this has some potential. It's a very interesting, unique mechanic, and, you know, whether or not it's useful at the moment, it could be an interesting tech in the future. This is something that can catch somebody off guard and possibly be really useful. And she's a knight, very tanky, so, you know, she can be an Aureus holder. And her S3 also, she does provide a little bit more for the team still. She gives attack buff to the team and defense for herself. So, you know, that's nice, right? She also recovers some of her own health, you know. So she's an Aureus holder that can last for a while, let's just... Now, Penelope. Now, whew. First glance, you look at her design. That's what I'm talking about. Hell yeah, brother. But in all seriousness, she's a 3-star. That's a thief, you know, low base defense, high health. That's how thieves are. Is imprint concentration and crit chance with some crit chance already, so she starts at a nice 34%, which is good. And she has okay attack for a 3-star, to be perfectly honest, and speed. Penelope, I'm not sure how to feel. So her S1 does... It gives her a 15% attack boost that goes up to 75%. So every time you attack, it goes up by 15%. And it can stack up to 3 times. Oh no, never mind. Sorry, I misspoke. It's 15% attack boost that stacks up to 3 times, so 45. And when somebody dies, she gets 75% CR boost. So I would say something like, let's say Dust Devil would be useful on her, so she's getting tons of S1s, of ramping up faster and also just doing a lot of damage, because it seems like this is going to be one of her main damage sources. Also, she has the Soul Burn, right? So her S1's interesting for ramping up. Her base stats aren't too crazy, though, for surviving, so you gotta keep that in mind. S2 decreases debuff duration of all allies by a turn and gives a barrier. It's also based on her attack, and then she gets an extra turn. So, depending on how good the barrier is, it could be actually decent. It's based on her attack, right? But it doesn't really seem like anything to write home about. The debuff duration reduction is nice. On herself, she's actually reduced it by 2 turns because she ends her turn and takes an extra, so you get that -1 turn, and you know, she gets the extra turn there. So, you know, getting rid of a 2-turn debuff on her is nice, but nothing too crazy. S3 is a very interesting ability. This is another new mechanic, resource reduction. It decreases fighting spirit and focus, and in this case it's 100%, and it doesn't matter whether the attack hits or not. So this is usable against, let's say, Remnant Violet or, you know, someone like that who can evade. So it will guaranteed always remove that, and also will decrease their attack by for 2 turns by a 100% chance, and also stun, and gives herself stealth for 2 turns. This is a pretty loaded ability, the amount of stuff it does, but in what cases are you really going to be using Penelope is the issue. Her base stats aren't amazing, and her skill set's a little janky, so even though I love the design, and I like the idea of the character, I'm not really sure if this character is ever going to be used, other than you're just a big fan of Penelope, right? So it's unfortunate, but if she ever got an EE, I think she would be a very good unit, but as it stands, I can't really see using Penelope to try and stop a character that actually uses a resource like Fighting Spirit or Focus. Because in the end, I feel like that character is still going to be more useful than Penelope is, overall. I could be wrong, but unless her damage is incredibly high on her S1, for instance, I don't really see how she could be a unit that's run, ever, honestly. Helen. Now, this is a character that I may not like their design. You know, the very clumsy, shy kind of character. She's an Ice Knight. She has really good base health and defense. She's slow as hell, just like the last one. This character is very interesting as well. So this seems like a PvE goddess kind of character that's just really useful for newer players especially. So, you know, she's a 3-star knight who's absurdly tanky. Her S1 boosts the CR of an ally by up to 15%. If you soul burn, it's all allies, you know. That's not anything too crazy, but it's nice. Oh, whoops, I skipped her S2. Her S2 increases defense of her for 2 turns and gives her some heal, and that's basically it. Really nothing too crazy, but just self-sufficiency, defense buff, and the heal. Her S3, however, gives her a counterattack stance and gives increase in a barrier to all allies, so that's actually kind of nice, right? Her counterattack is constantly CR pushing allies, and increased speed and barrier to allies, that's pretty big, I think, in terms of PvE, right? And also, every time, even though it's 8-turn cooldown, every time she's hit by an attack that targets all allies, the skill cooldown's reduced by 2 turns. So, entirely possible that in PvE you can literally keep this up forever. And she's a knight, you can have like Aureus on her, for instance. She has a heal and a defense buff, and she's pushing up allies constantly with her counterattack. I actually think that she could be pretty useful for stuff. People like using Crozet as their Wyvern tank, for instance. I think you could even use Helen, although he has a possible debuff on his S1, so it's a little bit different. But overall, just kind of nice, useful things, I think, really. I think she seems pretty solid for a 3-star unit, honestly. Then we get to the EEs. So we start with Shu. Shu gets up to 10 more speed, and speed imprints, or speed EEs are usually highly coveted. I don't know how much Shu actually needs the speed. I've not been a big fan of Shu for a while. I think that she's very underwhelming. Most people see her as a Ravi counter. However, most Shus I've seen, and even if you just do the math, and for instance in a damage calculator, she can't one-shot a Ravi. In fact, she can't really get that close if the Ravi is actually drafted into any protection whatsoever. So I don't really respect this character all that much. But with this EE, as much as I hate this character, I'm not a fan of this thing at all. But S1, when a critical hit is made with Chop, 40% chance to activate Froch, which is her S2, which has some defense pen and does a bunch of damage. People run Shu on counter set. That means there's a 40% chance that when she counters, she could possibly just kill you, honestly. S1 into S2. The S2 extra damage by 20%, I feel like that dobody's really matter. Nobody's going to take that. And then help me, comma, Scream, giving immunity to all allies for 2 turns. So I believe her S3 gives anti-crit. So if you have this and you have the anti-crit, I'm not sure which one would be dispelled first by a character like Carrot, but it's possible that they added this as some sort of extra form to give immunity to the team, so that means that, you know, you could use that to protect yourself from Carrot, because Carrot can only strip 1 buff, and maybe she would be stripping the anti-crit rather than the immunity. At least that's the hope, right? So that's just a little possibility, but I feel like this one is the more aggressive one and would actually make her much more viable at actually killing units, because right now her damage is pretty lackluster. This is the only ability that's really done much damage, and the fact that you can get a free extra hit of her S2 from her S1, I think might make her actually a really big threat. if you get counterattacked by this into this, you could just lose the match right off that, possibly. This is one of the biggest mistakes I've ever seen in the game. Character that everyone calls an MLM unit, you know, multi-level marketing, like a meme unit, right? That's in Cartusia as a meme versus cleavers, for instance. They're making a EE that gives an extra 5% chance evasion. That means Moonlight Dreamblade to the entire team. So if you already have Moonlight Dreamblade on your whole team, well, that's 40% evasion. I don't like this one bit. Nobody wants to play against this guy. He's not fun. He used to be on every defense team in Arena in the entire game, just because he had that extra chance to evade, so your defense team could just win matches out of the blue. And, you know, RNG is powerful in this game. You can get really lucky or insanely unlucky, so, you know, this was added in, and I hate it. I hate everything about it. I don't want to fight against this, especially as a cleaver. I think people are actually going to be drafting him as an anti-cleave unit with him with, like, Violet and Remnant Violet, etc., and it makes them a little more reliable. I don't think people are really going to use these two. I can't really see either of these two ever being used, because the whole point of this character is his S2 giving that evasion to the whole team, that extra factor of uncertainty that you don't know what's going to happen in the match. Now, Kitty Clarissa's, this EE I think is actually pretty damn good. I think all these EEs are actually really good for the character, to be honest. Effect Resist, that's exactly what you want, because she's an anti-debuff character cleanser. You put Strat Gauntlet on her, etc. So that's just a little extra, and, you know, with her imprint, etc., she has so much effect resist. She's the most free-to-play effect resist character in the entire game, where you can use her against basically any debuffer, and she can't get debuffed. Their S1 recovers health of the ally that she attacks with. I don't really know how much health is going to recover, but I don't think this is really the one that's going to be used. I think one of these two is going to be used. So her S2 has a soul burn to ignore effect resist of the opponent, and it's a strip. And so, assuming that this works after, it says after using the skill, so I think it's going to happen after the strip. That means this is an 80% chance to restrict for 2 turns. I don't know if this is really going to be all that useful, you know. It seems okay to restrict people, but are you really going to be running like a 290 speed Kitty Clarissa versus Cleave or something? I kind of doubt it. This one, however, a 20% pushback for S2, I think this is actually pretty nice. I think this one with their strict has some edge cases, but isn't the best. But I think being able to push back enemies is a really big deal. So here, let's say against Fairy Tale Tenebria, and you S3, you know, which gives an extra turn into the S2, and whether you soul burn it or not, you know, soul burn will make it guaranteed. But even if you don't soul burn it, being able to push back the whole team by 20%, and I believe you land unbuffable and strip their buffs, that's kind of like a Basar pushback. You would make your Kitty Clarissa a pretty fast unit, let's say like 250 with as much effect resist as you possibly can. And then you're able to get the turn advantage from with your entire team against your opponent. They lose all their buffs, I believe, and they have unhealable and or pushback. I think this is really strong. It actually makes her a much more viable character, I think, because as it stands, kind of felt like she just wasn't doing enough for your team compared to other cleansers. But this pushback, giving your entire team that turn advantage and stripping, could actually make a big difference, possibly, if you run a fast Kitty Clarissa to counter fast debuffers. So, it's just a thought. We'll have to see how it actually turns out, but definitely has some viability, I think. So, then, you know, we have some things like Judge Kisei is getting the next skin. We have some nice borders, you know. We got the bronze, silver, gold one right here. We got the master one right here. We got the champion one. We have the crab gamer one, the emperor one right here. And then we got the legend one. And, you know, nice frames overall. And now we're on to what I care about the most. Almost more than ReZero, just because it seemed a lot more fun than I first expected. ML Charles. So, I like to call him Carlos, because his name is Closer Charles, and people are going to come up with some stupid name on Reddit anyway, so I figured I would just call him Carlos. Seems like a fun name. So he's a dark thief, which I think nobody expected this to be a thief, but you know, it's kind of interesting. So he's got a passive there. Lots of ML5s have passives nowadays, especially. His base stats are the exact same as Violet. He's a Scorpio Thief, and he has crit chance concentration right here. So immediately, just with the concentration and his crit chance, he's going to get a nice 40% crit chance, which is amazing. Really good damage base stat, good speed. His defense is low. You know, all thieves have low defense but high health, just like Violet. So that means flat health is actually, or flat defense is actually good on him. So, his S2, Closer. After an ally except for the caster attacks, if the enemy's health is less than 30%, increases combat readiness by up to 50%. So that's a big push, 50%, and it's called Closer, right? So he's supposed to be one to finish everything off. So you want to attack an enemy, and they get to low health, and that means you can run a slow Carlos here, right? He doesn't actually have to be that fast, because he gets a 50% push, and he gets Perception, which is Violet's buff. That's 15% crit chance and crit damage. That's an extra 15% crit chance on top of his imprint and his base, putting him at 55% crit chance, just base. That means crit chance neck is actually detrimental on him. You only need 45% crit chance in gear. And he gets that combat readiness, which means you need almost no speed and no crit chance on this character. He's very easy to build for those two stats, and that means you can probably just go purely into damage. So then we get to his S3, Descent. This attacks all enemies, increasing attack of all allies for 2 turns, and increases their combat readiness by 20%. So this screams cleave to me, right? Increases evasion of the caster for 3 turns as well, so he has some decent survivability. And Soul Burn is increased damage dealt, so I'm not entirely sure how much damage it's going to do. We don't know the ratios, but for a character that only needs to build a low amount of speed and very low amount of crit chance, similar to somebody, let's say like Cdom, you can build him similar to that. This seems very powerful, because if you can take all those stats you need, so only 45% crit chance is needed on top of what the base is, and you don't need a bunch of speed, that means all that damage pumped into this ability might be a huge AoE cleave. And he gives attack buff to the entire team, so it makes it so that he also, you know, sets up the rest of the team. He seems like he could be really strong in cleave. The thing is, I don't know if he's going to be insane. It's difficult to tell about characters like this before they come out, how they really fit into the meta, if they're actually usable. AoE right now is at a huge risk with Elena, ML Kawazu, General Purgus, all sorts of units that do things when they're hit. So possibly this is actually just detrimental and won't work. But it seems to have potential, and it seems like a lot of fun, I think. If we look at his S1, Elimination. So Elimination just does some damage, but if he has Perception, his S2, then he uses Demolition, and it does extra damage proportional to the target's lost health, so it's like a finisher, right? It makes it so he can instantly, like, pop somebody, I would assume. And when they're defeated, decrease the cooldown of his S3 by a turn. So I'm assuming this is going to hit pretty damn hard against a unit that was just affected by his Closer ability, so they're 30% health or below. Probably will just finish them off. And, you know, he has evasion, so I think he has a lot of potential to last in a fight as well, which is really strong. And overall, I don't know. He seems like a decent character. For anyone who's thinking about skipping Spectre Tenebre for him, I would say that's an absolute no. And for anyone who's considering whether they should be pulling for the ReZero units, or if they should get Basar or Holiday Yufine, I would say that they most likely should skip Holiday Yufine and Basar. Holiday Yufine has already been buffed. She's not really anything special at the moment. She's decent with the Guild War artifact to be used against characters like Fairy Tale Tenebria. Basar is an incredibly good unit in PvP, and really, really good. And he hasn't had a banner in a while, but you want to be able to pull the ReZero units, not only because they're limited, but they have a lot of potential. And as a side note, if you pull one of those characters right now... Oh yeah, he comes with T. Well, if you pull one of them now, you might miss out on Seaside Iseria, who's apparently coming right after the ReZero collaboration, they said. So if you want, you know, this Iseria or either the ReZero units, you might have to really consider whether or not you're going to pull. Like, That's a hard decision. I personally would say you should go for the ReZero units and Iseria over Basar and Holiday Yufine. But regardless of who you choose for, those are all the units and my thoughts on them, and I hope that helped you make a decision maybe if you were interested in the units, or maybe some sort of extra thought towards, oh, maybe the better unit's better than I thought, or maybe the unit's actually crappy. But anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I appreciate it. I hope I see you next time. Bye.